My wife and I bought an old general store on the edge of Mill Haven, Kentucky, 43 years ago, but we walked away from it when I took a corporate job up in Cincinnati. I hadn't set foot inside that building in 31 years. Though she drove back down there 6 times every single year, regular as the seasons. When she passed last spring, my son looked me straight in the eye over her grave and said, "Dad, just unload that eyesore already. It's bleeding you dry." I told myself he was right. I told myself I'd go down once, collect whatever mattered, and hand the keys to a realtor. But the moment I turned onto Harlan Street and saw the front porch light burning, I stopped the truck and sat there with my hands shaking on the wheel. Someone had left that light on, and I knew for a fact I hadn't been the one to do it. I'm glad you're here with me tonight, friend. Stay with me through this whole thing, because this story gets heavier before it gets lighter. And when you get to the end, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, your city, your state, what time it is, where you are. It genuinely means something to me to know how far these stories reach. My name is Russell. I'm 67 years old, and 8 months ago, I buried the only woman who ever made me feel like the best version of myself. Diane was my world for 38 years of marriage, and now I rattle around a too-quiet house in Cincinnati's Hyde Park neighborhood, while my adult children treat me like a file that needs to be closed before the end of the fiscal quarter. The calls started about 3 weeks after the funeral. My son, Nathan, has a way of making greed sound like math. He works in commercial property development up in Columbus, and to him, every building is just a number waiting to be unlocked. "Pop, we need to talk about Mill Haven," he said, "not even good morning, not even how are you sleeping. That property is sitting on assessed value of nearly $400,000 now. Southern Kentucky real estate is popping. You're paying taxes, insurance, utilities on a building you haven't touched in 3 decades. That's not grief, Pop. That's negligence." His wife, Courtney, was on the extension. She was always on the extension. "Russell," she said, in the smooth, practiced voice she uses for clients she's trying to move past an objection, "we only want what's best for you. A fresh start. Liquidity." Liquidity. Diane would have laughed until she cried if she'd heard them use that word about her store. My daughter, Pam, came at it from a different angle. She called every other day from her townhouse in Lexington and used the word simplify the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. "Dad, you're 67. You've got blood pressure issues. You don't need to be managing a property 4 hours away. Let's simplify your life so you can focus on your health." Focus on my health. As if losing Diane hadn't already gutted every routine that kept me healthy in the first place. What they didn't understand, or wouldn't let themselves understand, was that Diane had loved that old building with something that went beyond reason. She'd found it when we were young and broke and full of big plans. We'd spent 2 summers fixing it up ourselves, stripping floors on our hands and knees, painting the tin ceiling, stocking the shelves with local goods and homemade preserves. When the Cincinnati opportunity came, I'd convinced her to lease it out to a rotating series of tenants while we decided what to do with it. 31 years later, we still hadn't decided. Or so I thought. Why hadn't I gone back? Honestly, I told myself it was too far, too much disruption. After I retired from the firm 4 years ago, I had even fewer excuses. But somehow the golf course was always calling, the grandkids always needed something, the Reds always had a homestand. The truth I hadn't wanted to look at directly was this. That store represented a version of Diane and me I wasn't sure I deserved anymore. The young couple who refinished those floors together, the people we'd been before comfort made us lazy about each other. "You haven't been inside that building since Diane passed," Pam said during one of her check-in calls. "I drove through Mill Haven last month, Dad. The facade is chipped. The awning's got a tear in it. It looks tired." Something tightened in my chest. Diane had always described that building in loving detail. The way the afternoon light came through the south windows, the original oak display cases she'd had restored. If the place looked tired now, it meant she was truly gone. "Maybe I should drive down," I said quietly. "What in the world for?" Nathan jumped in. He'd been listening silently. He was always listening silently. "Dad, you're not supposed to be taking solo 4-hour drives. Your cardiologist specifically said." "My cardiologist said I shouldn't be sedentary. Sitting in a truck is the opposite of sedentary." "That's not what that means, and you know it." I gripped the phone. They had been using my heart medication as a leash for months, as if being 67 and slightly imperfect in the cardiovascular department meant I'd forfeited my right to make my own decisions. "If you're listening right now, and your grown children talk to you like you're a liability on two legs, I need you to hear something. Age is not a diagnosis. Grief is not dementia. And you are still the parent. I need to go through whatever personal items Diane may have left there, I said. There could be photographs, journals, things that matter to the family. We can hire someone to do a walkthrough, Nathan offered immediately. Too immediately. I'm doing it myself, I said. I've been driving since before you were born, Nathan. Silence. Then, fine. But you check in when you leave and when you arrive, and you don't make any decisions about the property until we've talked. Like I was 16 years old asking for the car keys. I went 3 weeks later on a Tuesday morning. Diane would have made me pack a proper cooler. So I packed a proper cooler, sandwiches, water, an apple. I drove south out of Cincinnati before the rush hour built, crossed into Kentucky as the hills started to round and green, and felt something in my shoulder blades slowly release that I hadn't realized was clenched. Diane had tried to describe this stretch of country to me 100 times. The tobacco fields in summer, the way the old courthouses sat at the center of their squares like they owned time. I'd always been somewhere else in my head when she talked, answering emails, running numbers. Now, with nobody waiting for my attention, I finally understood what she'd been telling me. I pulled into Millhaven at 4 in the afternoon. The town square looked the same and entirely different, the way places do when you've been gone too long. I turned onto Harlan Street, and there it was, Hartwell's General, in the original painted letters Diane had insisted on keeping even when the sign painter offered us something modern. The facade had a few chips, just like Pam said. The green and white awning had a small tear near the left bracket. But the window boxes, Diane's window boxes, the ones she'd planted with trailing ivy and red geraniums every spring, were full, freshly watered. The geraniums were alive and blooming. I sat in the truck for 5 minutes with the engine running. Diane had been gone 8 months. Nobody plants fresh geraniums in a dead woman's window boxes unless they're being looked after by someone who cares. The front door of the store opened before I'd even crossed the porch. A man stood in the doorway, mid-50s, broad-shouldered, wearing a canvas work apron dusted with sawdust. He had a quiet, careful face. When he saw me, he went absolutely still. "You're Russell," he said, not a question. "I am," I said. "And you are?" He took a breath, slow and steady, like a man preparing for something. "My name is Calvin Briggs. I live here, sir, above the store. Been here going on 11 years. 11 years. I'd had tenants cycle in and out of that building, but the last official lease I knew about had ended 7 years ago. Nathan had handled the paperwork after that, and told me the place was sitting empty while we figured out next steps. 11 years. And there were fresh geraniums in the window boxes. "Sir," Calvin said carefully, "Mrs. Diane, she never told you about me, did she?" There are moments in a man's life when the floor shifts under him without warning. This was one of those moments. "Why don't you come inside?" he said. "I think I owe you a very long explanation." He made coffee without asking whether I wanted any, which told me he was the kind of man who took care of people the way Diane had taken care of people instinctively, without needing to be thanked for it. He moved through that store the way you only move through a place that belongs to your bones. And the store itself, I had to stop and just look at it. The original oak cases were gleaming. The tin ceiling had been freshly painted a warm cream. Along the south wall, someone had built a row of built-in bookshelves from floor to ceiling, filled with paperbacks and hardcovers, and a small handwritten sign that read, "Take one, leave one." A woodworking bench occupied the back corner where the old stockroom had been. Clean tools lined up with the kind of precision that comes from pride, not habit. Someone had loved this building. "I got out of prison 11 years and 4 months ago," Calvin said, setting 2 mugs on the original counter. He said it plainly, no flinching. "Did 18 months for a mistake I made when I was 39. Lost my contractor's license. Lost my marriage. Lost most of what I'd built." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I came to Millhaven because my mother's people were from here, and I had nowhere else to go. I was sleeping in my truck out on Route 68. He paused and looked at the wall where Diane had hung an old Kentucky map the day we first bought the place. It was still there. Mrs. Diane was doing a supply run for the church food pantry. She knocked on my truck window and asked me if I was all right. I told her I wasn't. She didn't give me a pamphlet. She didn't give me a hotline number. She said, "I have a building that needs someone to keep an eye on it. I have an apartment upstairs that's sitting empty, and I think you look like a man who knows how to use his hands." My throat went tight. That was Diane. That was exactly, completely, undeniably Diane. She helped me get my contractor's license reinstated, Calvin continued. It took almost 2 years, all the appeals and the paperwork. She paid the attorney fees. She was there at the hearing. He stopped, looked out the south window at the afternoon light exactly the way she'd always described it. I've been maintaining this building, paying the utilities myself, running a small repair and restoration business out of the back. Mrs. Diane wouldn't let me pay rent. She said this was my fresh start, and she wasn't going to charge a man for a fresh start. I couldn't speak, so I just listened. She came down 4, 5, 6 times a year. We'd walk through the building together. She'd bring things, new books for the shelf, a quart of good paint, seeds for the window boxes. We'd have dinner. She loved the biscuits from the diner on the square. He smiled at that briefly and genuinely, the smile of someone remembering a very specific warmth. She talked about you a lot, sir. That hit me somewhere I wasn't ready to be hit. She did? All the time. Told me about the summers you both spent fixing this place up. Said you had a real gift for woodwork, that you built the display cases in the back yourself. Said you gave it all up when the career took over and she always figured you'd come back to it someday. I hadn't touched a piece of raw wood in 20 years. I told myself I wasn't interested anymore. But hearing it through Calvin's voice, hearing Diane's faith in me, delivered by a stranger she'd quietly turned into family, I felt something old and stubborn creak open in my chest. When did she tell you she was sick? I asked. Calvin set down his mug. About 2 years ago. She called from the road, said her doctor up in Cincinnati had found something, and that she needed to tell someone who wouldn't fall apart on her. I pressed my hands flat on the old counter and just breathed. She didn't want you to know, he said carefully. She was very specific about that. She said, and I'm going to say this exactly the way she said it because she made me promise to get it right if this day ever came, she said. Russell spent 40 years carrying everything for everyone. He finally has peace. I am not taking that peace away from him. The room blurred. I blinked it clear. She came down for treatments at the Regional Cancer Center in Bowling Green, Calvin continued quietly. I drove her when she was too tired to drive herself. I sat in the waiting room. I made sure she ate something before she drove back north. My wife had been fighting cancer in Kentucky while I played golf in Ohio, while I read thrillers in my armchair, while I convinced myself the distance between us was just the comfortable quiet of a long marriage settling. Now, if you're listening to this tonight and that sentence just landed somewhere inside you, I want you to sit with it, because I spent 8 months after Diane died thinking the silence in our marriage was normal. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known until I was standing in that store with a stranger telling me the truth, was that the silence hadn't been normal. It had been her trying very hard not to burden the man she loved. Was there anything else she left here? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Anything she wanted me to find? Calvin nodded slowly. He walked to the back of the store, knelt beside the woodworking bench, and slid out a flat cedar box from beneath it. I recognized that box. I had built it the first summer we owned the store, from a piece of cedar left over from the shelving project. I'd given it to her as a joke, somewhere to keep your secrets, I'd said. She'd laughed and called it perfect. She had kept her secrets in it. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, organized by date, paper-clipped in groups by year. The earliest ones were on our regular household stationery. The later ones were on letterhead I didn't know. Southern Kentucky Cancer Care, Bowling Green. I looked at Calvin. He nodded once, quietly, and left the room. I sat down on the old wood stool behind the counter, the same stool I'd used 35 years ago when I was learning how to run a register, and I opened a letter from about 2 years back. My dearest Russell, the doctor says it's in the lymph nodes now. She's not ready to call it terminal, but she used the word aggressive 3 times in one appointment, which I've learned is the way doctors say what they're afraid to say directly. I drove home from Bowling Green alone and stopped at a gas station outside of Horse Cave and sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes before I could see the road clearly enough to drive. I keep starting to call you. I get as far as pressing your name on the screen, and then I think about what your face will do, and I can't. You've watched my mother disappear piece by piece from Alzheimer's. You held Nathan's hand through his divorce. You were there for every one of Pam's pregnancies, every scare, every midnight hospital run. Russell, you have given yourself away to this family so completely for so long. I watched you retire 4 years ago and finally start to breathe. You started sleeping through the night. You started laughing at things again. You started making furniture in the garage just for the pleasure of it, and then you stopped, and I never understood why you stopped. I could not watch you sit in a cancer waiting room and age 10 years and 3 months. I could not do it. That is my weakness. I know it is. But it is also the most complete act of love I have ever managed. Calvin says I'm being a fool. He says you'd want to know. He's probably right. But not yet, not yet. I love you, Russell. I have loved you through every version of yourself, including the ones you're not proud of, especially those. Forever yours, Diane. I had to put it down. I stared at the afternoon light coming through the south windows, the exact light Diane had spent 30 years trying to describe to me, and I understood for the first time why she'd never been able to find the words. Some things you can only know by standing inside them. I picked up another letter, this one from about 8 months before she died. Dearest Russell, today was a good day. The tumor markers came back lower than last month. Dr. Hensley called it encouraging progress, and I chose to believe her completely and without reservation because some days you need to just choose to believe something. Calvin refinished the original hardwood floor in the north half of the store today. It took him 3 days, and it looks extraordinary. I sat in the window and watched him work and thought about you building these display cases 35 years ago, how you'd whistle while you worked, how sawdust would get in your eyelashes, and you wouldn't notice for hours. I want to bring you here. I imagine it sometimes calling you on a Tuesday and saying, "Drive south, I have something to show you," showing you what Calvin has done with this place. Watching you run your hand along the grain of that restored floor and finally believing me that this building deserved to be kept. But then I think, if I bring you here, I have to tell you why I've been coming, and I'm not ready. I am a coward about this one specific thing, Russell. I am not a coward about anything else in my life. But about watching you grieve for me while I'm still alive, I am a complete and total coward. I hope you can forgive me. I hope when you finally read these, you'll understand that every choice I made was an act of love, even the ones that look like lies. Calvin's little girl, Rosie, turned 8 last week. She baked me a lopsided chocolate cake and sang happy birthday to me, even though it wasn't my birthday, just because she wanted to. I laughed harder than I've laughed in 2 years. Keep that image with you if you can. A lopsided chocolate cake and a little girl singing off-key on a Kentucky Tuesday afternoon. That's what I was given here that I couldn't have found anywhere else. Forever yours, Diane. I didn't know Calvin had a daughter. I hadn't asked yet. There was a soft knock on the storeroom door. A small girl leaned in, 8 or 9 years old, dark braids, wearing a purple shirt with a soccer ball on it. She studied me with the frank, unguarded curiosity that only children manage. "Daddy says you're Mrs. Diane's husband," she said. "I am," I said. "My name's Russell." "I'm Rosie." She came a few steps into the room. "Mrs. Diane taught me how to make pie crust. The butter has to be cold. Did you know that?" "I did not know that," I said, though Diane had probably told me 40 times. "She said you made good pie too, but you always forgot the cold butter part." Rosie tilted her head. "She talked about you a lot." "So I'm hearing," I said. "She said you were going to be sad for a long time when she was gone, but that you'd be okay eventually because you were tougher than you looked." Rosie considered this. "No offense." I laughed. It came out rough and surprised, the kind of laugh that happens before you can stop it. "None taken, sweetheart." Calvin appeared in the doorway. "Rosie, let Mr. Russell have his space." "It's all right," I said. "She can stay." I looked at Calvin. "Sit down. I have some questions." He sat. Rosie climbed onto the stool beside her father, completely at home in this store, in this building I had abandoned and Diane had quietly kept alive. "Your daughter lives here too?" I asked. "Half the week. Her mother and I share custody." He rested a hand on Rosie's shoulder. "Mrs. Diane helped with that too. There were some rough patches a few years back. She wrote a character reference for my custody evaluation. She didn't have to do that." His jaw tightened briefly. "She didn't have to do a lot of what she did. But she did it anyway," I said. "Yes, sir." My phone buzzed. "Nathan." I watched the screen light up and go dark and didn't touch it. "Calvin," I said, "my children are going to pressure me to sell this building. I need you to understand that's a real possibility I'm facing." "I know," he said quietly. "Your son came down here about 6 weeks after Mrs. Diane passed." My stomach dropped. "Nathan came here. Him and your daughter-in-law. They told me I was trespassing. They told me the arrangement I had with Mrs. Diane wasn't legally binding because there was no formal lease. They said if I didn't vacate willingly, they'd have the sheriff remove me. He said it without anger. Just wait." They told me not to contact you, that you didn't need the stress. The cold that moved through me was not grief. It was something harder than grief. What did you do? I asked. I told them I would wait to speak with you directly, that out of respect for Mrs. Diane, I wouldn't go anywhere until her husband knew the truth. He looked at me steadily. I've been waiting 8 months, sir. My own children had known about Calvin and Rosie for 8 months. They had known about this store being maintained and loved and lived in by a man Diane had chosen to help. They had driven down here, threatened him, and then come home to Cincinnati and Columbus and continued delivering their lectures about liquidity and simplification without saying a single word. They hadn't just kept a secret, they had tried to erase one. I stood up. My legs felt older than they had that morning. Where's the last letter in the box, the most recent one? Calvin reached into the box and drew out an envelope from the bottom. He handed it to me carefully, the way you hand someone something breakable. The envelope read, "For Russell. Please don't open this until you've met Calvin and heard everything he has to say." I'd met Calvin. I'd heard everything. Inside, the handwriting was shakier than the earlier letters. She'd written this close to the end. "Russell, my love. If you're reading this, it means you came. It means you finally drove down Harlan Street and saw what I've been tending all these years. I hope you're not too angry with me. I hope you can understand that I kept this secret not to exclude you, but to protect something beautiful from being talked to death before it had a chance to breathe. I need to tell you something about our children that is going to hurt you. Nathan and Pam have known about Calvin for over a year. Nathan found the utility payments when I gave him signatory access to the estate account. He hired someone to look into it. When he found out what I'd been doing, he didn't come to me with love. He came to me with a spreadsheet. He said I was being taken advantage of. He said Calvin's record made him a liability. He said I was using family money to fund a charity case and that when I was gone there would be legal complications. I told him Calvin was not a liability. I told him I had made my choices deliberately and with full understanding of what I was doing. Nathan told me I was clearly not thinking clearly. He's been saying that about me since the diagnosis, as if the cancer migrated to my judgment instead of my lymph nodes. Pam was gentler. She always is. But she said the same things in a softer voice, which somehow made it worse. I told them both that this building and what I'd built inside it was my decision to make, and that I had already spoken with an attorney about protecting it. They were not happy. But Russell, when I told them I had cancer, do you know what Nathan said first? He said, "We should probably get the estate documents updated. Not, 'I love you,' not, 'we'll get through this.' Estate documents. I don't tell you this to turn you against our children. I tell you this so you understand why, when they pressure you to sell, it is not about your well-being. They are good people in some ways. But they have learned to see love as a transaction, and I don't know when that happened, and I grieve it. I have spoken with an attorney here in Millhaven. Her name is Patricia Ware. She has an office on the square. She has everything, documents, options, all of it. I set up a trust before I got too sick to think straight. You have choices, Russell. Real ones. I made sure of that. But more importantly, please do something for me. Whatever you decide about the building, please pick up a piece of wood again. Please make something with your hands. You were never more fully yourself than when you were building things. I fell in love with you on the floor of that store with sawdust in your eyelashes and you didn't even know I was watching. Come home to yourself, Russell. That's the only thing I ever really wanted for you. All my love, always, Diane." I sat with that letter in my hands for a long time. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift through the south windows into something gold and amber and perfect. Long enough for Rosie to appear in the doorway again and ask Calvin in a loud whisper if Mr. Russell was okay, and for Calvin to say, quietly, "Yes, he's okay, he's just figuring some things out." That's exactly what I was doing. I called Patricia Ware from the counter of my own store, standing in the place where I'd stood as a young man, full of plans I'd let other things interrupt. She answered on the second ring, warm and direct. And when I told her who I was, she said, "Mr. Hartwell, Diane told me you'd call someday. I've been ready." Her office was a converted Victorian on the west side of the square, bookshelves to the ceiling, good coffee going. She spread Diane's documents across a wide oak desk and walked me through everything Diane had structured, with the careful precision of a woman who'd had 3 years to think it through. The store was in a revocable trust. Calvin had documented rights of occupancy. The trust held enough in reserve to cover taxes and insurance for 7 years. Diane had created 3 paths forward, and Patricia laid them out without editorial comment, because that was the kind of lawyer she was. Option 1. Sell the building. Calvin and Rosie receive a full year's notice and $30,000 in relocation assistance, clean and legal. Option 2. I retain ownership and formalize Calvin's arrangement with a long-term lease at below market rate, giving him legal standing and giving me a managed asset. Option 3. I transfer the building to Calvin outright. Use the trust reserve to purchase a small residence in Millhaven for myself. Diane had identified 2 properties, both within walking distance of the store. Live near the life she'd built. Let the woodworking bench in the back corner of the store become mine again. Patricia slid a sealed envelope across the desk. She asked me to give you this only if you came down in person and met Calvin before making any decision. Inside was a note card in Diane's handwriting, just 2 lines. You already know which one is right. You've known since you walked through that door. Trust yourself, Russell. You always were smarter than you gave yourself credit for. My phone rang. Nathan. I let it ring, then a text. Pop, we know you went to Millhaven. Do not sign anything. We're coming down tomorrow. Do not make any decisions. Do not make any decisions. As though the last 40 years of my life hadn't been one long series of decisions, most of them good, 1 or 2 of them questionable, none of them requiring my son's permission. I looked at Patricia. Which properties did Diane identify? She smiled. One of them is 3 blocks from the store, has a garage workshop, and the previous owner was a Finnish carpenter who left behind a full equipment set. I picked up the pen. When I drove back to the store that evening, Nathan's Tahoe was in the lot beside Calvin's truck. Through the window I could see Nathan standing in the middle of the restored floor looking uncomfortable, and Rosie was showing him something in a picture book with the total confidence of a child who assumes all adults are interested in picture books. Calvin was at the counter, calm, giving Nathan the same steady, careful dignity he'd shown me. I walked through the door. Nathan turned. His face cycled through about 4 expressions before landing on controlled concern. Pop, we need to talk before you do something you can't take back. Already done, I said. Dad. Nathan. I said it the way I used to say it when he was a teenager pushing past a boundary. He stopped. Sit down at that table, both of you. Courtney had come in behind him. I looked at them both. I'm going to tell you some things your mother wanted you to know. I won't tell you that conversation was easy. It wasn't. Nathan went through anger and defensiveness, and something that looked, briefly, like shame. Courtney was quieter than usual. Pam, when I called her from the store that night, cried for a long time, and I think at least some of those tears were genuine grief for a version of her mother she'd never made the effort to know. Here's what I'll tell you. They didn't get the building. They didn't get the outcome they'd driven 4 hours to secure. But something happened over Rosie's lopsided attempts at the card game she'd taught Nathan, and Calvin's quiet offer of coffee nobody had asked for, and the simple stubbornness of a warm-lit room against a dark Kentucky night. Something shifted just slightly. Not fixed, not healed, but cracked open in a way that might, with enough patience, let some light in eventually. I slept that night in a motel on the edge of town. I lay there listening to a silence that was completely different from the Cincinnati silence, filled with cricket noise and a distant train and the smell of green hills through a cracked window, and for the first time in 8 months, I did not reach for Diane's side of the bed in the dark. I reached for the notepad on the nightstand instead, and I started sketching. A cabinet. Low, clean lines, solid oak, the kind of piece Diane had always said our hallway needed. I closed on the house with the garage workshop 6 weeks later. Calvin and Rosie helped me move in on a Saturday in September. Nathan didn't come. Pam sent a houseplant and a card that said she was trying to understand, and I chose to believe her because some days you just choose to believe something. The woodworking bench in the back of the store is mine 3 afternoons a week. Rosie comes by after school and asks me unnecessary questions and eats whatever Calvin has left on the counter and shows me videos on her phone of soccer players doing tricks I will never be able to name. Last week I finished the hall cabinet. It's the best thing I've built since those display cases 35 years ago. I ran my hand along the grain before I brought it inside, and I thought about Diane watching a younger version of me do exactly that, quietly, without me knowing. Come home to yourself, she'd written. I did, Diane. I finally did. Now, if you're still here with me, friend, I want you to sit with something before you scroll away tonight. The biggest thing this story taught me isn't about children or inheritance or property law. It's about the silence we let settle into our marriages and call it peace when it isn't. Diane didn't keep her secrets because she stopped trusting me. She kept them because she loved me too much, and I had made myself too comfortable to notice the difference. If you're married right now, tonight, please ask your spouse something real. Not, how was your day? Something underneath that. Ask them what they've been carrying alone. Ask them what they've stopped telling you because they figured you were too tired to hear it. That question might be the most important thing you say all year. And if your adult children are treating you like an asset to be managed instead of a person to be loved, you have rights. A revocable living trust can protect your property decisions from being overridden. A durable power of attorney assigned to a trusted non-family member is entirely legal and often wise. The Elder Care Locator at 1-800-677-1116 connects you to free local resources in every state. AARP offers free legal consultations. You are allowed to choose who inherits your life. You are allowed to choose your own family. Now, I want to hear from you. Comment 1 if you think Russell did the right thing. Comment 2 if you think Nathan and Pam deserve more grace. Comment 3 if you've ever been in a situation where someone left you something beautiful to discover after they were gone. And below that, tell me where you're listening from, your city, your state, what time it is. I read every single one. I'm Russell Hartwell. I'm 67 years old, and I'm home.